Hey, good evening, everybody. I just want to mention real quickly, uh, we have a new AA meeting at Starting Point on Thursday nights at 6 o'clock. So we'll come out and support it. It'd be great. And then also, we have 3 Al-Anon meetings now. The place is getting packed with Al-Anon. 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday, 6 o'clock at night. And then we also have a Friday night meeting at 7:30. And Naranon meets on Monday nights at 6:30. So we have a lot of new stuff, a lot of stuff going on. Please check the website. Okay. As Lorraine mentioned, we're starting the series on grief, loss, and separation. And I'm going to basically start it off by doing a reading. I picked a reading from November 2nd. If you get the opportunity from November 1st through November 5th in the language of letting go, everything's about the grieving process. It's pretty neat. November 2nd. To let ourselves wholly grieve our losses is how we surrender to the process of life and recovery. Some experts, like Patrick Carnes, call the 12 steps a program for dealing with our losses, a program for dealing with grief. How do we grieve? Awkwardly, imperfectly, usually with a great deal of resistance, often with anger and attempts to negotiate, ultimately by surrendering to the pain. The grief process, says Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is a 5-stage process: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and finally acceptance. That's how we grieve. Although this 5-step process looks tidy on paper, it is not tidy in life. We not move through it in a series of compartments. We usually flounder through kicking and screaming with much back and forth movement to reach that peaceful state called acceptance. When we talk about unfinished business from our past, we're usually referring to losses about which we have not grieved completely. We can learn to understand the grief process and how it applies to recovery. Even good changes in recovery can bring loss and consequently grief. We can learn to help ourselves and others by understanding and becoming familiar with this process. We can learn fully to grieve our losses, feel our pain, accept and forgive, so we can feel joy and love. Today, God, help me open myself to the process of grieving my losses. Help me allow myself to flow through the grief process, accepting all the stages might achieve peace and acceptance in my life. Please help me to be gentle with myself and others while we go through the very human process of healing. I wanted to share that with you because as we go through the process, I really believe very deeply that the ultimate process of life is the grieving process. And grieving has a lot of faces. When Kubler-Ross wrote the 5 stages, she basically was talking about, grieving through death. And yet now we understand there are many deaths that take place in all of our lives, day in and day out. There might be death not in the sense of physical, but also we have emotional deaths, spiritual deaths, social deaths. What that means is we're experiencing different processes of change. Change is scary because it means that we have to be able to let go of the old and be open to the new. So this process of grieving is very powerful. It's a process because it helps us to be able to do closure so we can open up new areas of our life. And unfortunately, so many of us have a tendency to do what I call partial closures. We don't totally finish it. And as a result, we are painful and we hurt throughout the glory of our life. And that's why we have to try to understand how this process works. One of the hardest things I ever experienced in my life was to know that constantly in the course of my journey in life, I was going through a lot of losses, a lot of change, a lot of new movement. Addicts understand this because basically, when you put drugs and alcohol down, your whole life has been centralized around them. And all of a sudden, it's like starting all over again. It's almost like, how do I start? How do I actually start this new life? It's scary. And yet, it's beautiful at the same time. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of investment in yourself, a lot of growth. And so therefore we have to invest in who we are as people. So the grieving process tells us that change is part of life. We have to be able to come to an acceptance of the change, which we don't do so easily, believe me. And we have to be able to be open to new things and new directions. We live in a world that's in constant change, constant craziness, constant many things. And therefore, we have to learn how to adjust, how to go through the process, how to be able to experience the process, because nothing's going to work exactly the way we want it to work. So look at the grief process in kind of a simple way, and I'll kind of give you an idea of how this is put together. I want to share something with you from Scripture. It's a story of somebody who went out to sow some seeds. And some of the seeds that he sowed fell on rock. Some seeds fell amongst shallow, sandy soil. Some fell amongst weeds and thorns, and some fell on good ground. The seed that fell on the rock couldn't grow, just laid there. And eventually the wind blew it away, the birds ate it, no matter what. There was no growth involved. The seed that fell on the shallow, sandy soil started to grow, but it was too shallow, too sandy. The first rainstorm that came along washed it away. The seed that fell amongst the weeds and thorns started to grow, but the weeds choked it out. The seed that fell on the good ground was able to develop roots and solid foundations and had to really develop the inside before the outside started to show. I equate that story to the concept of grieving, because so many times in the course of our life, we're like the seed falling on the rock. Many of us, many times in the course of our journey in life, go through stages of denial. Now, I want to share this with you. I truly, truly believe that denial is not a bad word. Denial is a protection word. And many of us go into denial because we aren't ready yet to look at something and to deal with something. Because many of us literally shut down, we close off, and it's scary. See, I don't want to deal with what I'm dealing with. So what do? I make believe it didn't happen. I go into what I call my own way of survival, and that is by basically going into this form called denial, which is normal, by the way. You know, it's interesting. The first three stages, denial, anger, and bargaining, it really work very powerfully. I'll tell you a story. You know, it's interesting because this couple I worked with quite a number of years ago when I was a priest, I was in the hospital with them, and the wife, who was only 52 years old, and her husband was there, and a doctor came in. They couldn't understand why she passed out, why they had to call 911. But they got the report. She had stage 4 cancer. Her body was full of cancer. She had no idea of it all, except that she was always tired. She was always passing out, all kinds of things. And so basically, when the husband heard that, he got angry. He just stood there. He didn't believe it. And he started yelling at the doctor and telling the doctor, you might be wrong. You might be wrong. I want a second opinion, and then I want a third opinion. I want lots of people to look at her, because I don't truly believe what you're saying to me. The moment the doctor told his wife that, and he heard it, he froze. When he froze, he did not want to hear what he heard. And the easiest thing to do was to lash out. And anger is part of the process of, grieving. He started grieving at that moment. And then he started going into the bargaining stage. Let's get other people to tell you that you're wrong. Let's move in another direction, back and forth. And it's interesting how he had to be calmed down by his wife. His wife very calmly turned to the doctor and said, "How long do I have?" The doctor said anywhere from 3 days to 3 months. There's no way of predicting it. And the husband was devastated. And it's interesting how she, as the patient, was calming down her husband because they both were going through the grieving process. It started automatically. See, we don't realize that when it comes to sickness, or it comes to the ending of a relationship, or it comes to the changing of a job, and when it comes to moving, it doesn't make any difference. Any type of change has some sort of grieving to it. There's a process that goes into it. And many of us are able to handle that somehow, some way, but many of us can't. The same thing when it comes to death. So many times we don't want to have to face somebody dying. So what do? We go into a state of denial. I never forget my aunt over in Pennsauken, who was in a wheelchair. Her and her brother lived together. Both of them were never married. And her brother was almost like a clock. He went to work every day, hardworking man. He was in his early 60s and basically came home from work one day and had a heart attack, fell down on the floor. He died. And his sister in the wheelchair kept getting cold compresses and putting on his head and just stayed there and told him, now, when you wake up, this is what we're going to have for supper. She kept talking to him about all kinds of things that he liked, back and forth. So finally, somebody came to the house. They called 911. He had been dead for a long time. She couldn't handle it, though. Even through the funeral and everything else, it took her almost 8 months to finally feel that feeling of anger, being angry at him. How can you love someone and be angry at them for dying? It's a natural process because I don't want you to die. Why is this happening? I don't want it to happen. So that fear, all that fear, anger, that frustration, all that stuff comes up. It even comes up in our own physical bodies a lot of times as we go through the aging process. Look how many people go through the whole process of, midlife crisis, as we call it. I'm in my 50s and 60s, but I want to be 20. At least I want to act like a 20-year-old anyway. And I find myself with the shirt open and the sports car and all this kind of stuff and everything else. I think all of a sudden, I'm back in high school again, whatever the hell it is. But the bottom line is, I'm going through a grieving process because my life is changing. I'm moving into another dimension of my life. I don't want to go there. So what do? I try to make believe it isn't happening because I'm angry. And yet, how do I deal with it? I bargain. I'll get a good-looking car. I get fixed up real good. I'll look good. Hey, what are you going to do? We all go through this process in life. It's scary every time we experience new dimensions in life. I'll tell you a funny one that happened to me. I'm constantly quoting from the old timers in AA because I learned a lot from them that taught me so much. So one day I was sitting at a meeting and a guy said to me, he said, "Hey, Vince, these old timers you talk about all the time, are they still alive?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, guess what? Welcome, old timer." They called me the old timer. I says, "Oh my God, how did that happen? How did I go from there to here?" But it's part of the process of life. We all go through it, whether you want to go through it or not. You can take all the anti-aging things and, we go to Facebook and they advertise all these, you take this pill, and you'll have the secret of youth and all this kind of stuff, and your life will change automatically and all, and we think, well, I'll try it. I'm a big culprit. My wife has to keep me calm all the time. She says, Vince, it's not going to work. Take it easy. Slow down. But I found this, I found that. When in reality, there's no magic. You're going to age anyway. You can buy 500 tons of aging cream and you're still going to age. Anti-aging cream, you're still going to age. You're going to lose the stuff up here. Look at the reflection here, the reflection on Charlie, the reflection on many of us in this room. What can I tell you? Things change. It's all part of the process we go through. Right, Joe? It's just life. And we go through different things of our body. Our body goes through changes. Physically, we can't do things that we did before. My wife used to say this to me all the time when I was refereeing basketball, back when I was in my 50s and 60s. I said to my wife, this is great. I'm going to do this till I'm in my 90s. She said, sure you are. That's all she ever says. Sure you are. Well, I'm 83, and guess what? I can't run up and down that court anymore. Things change. Your body changes. Everything changes. So grieving is part of it. Sure, you're going to grieve. You got to go through grieving. So all day long, we're going through grieving because we're also experiencing change. Look at technology. The changes it's brought. Many of us have been through the generation where we began with a little radio, and now all of a sudden, you've got everything right on your wrist. I was in the room the other day, and a lady said, oh, I got an email. She's looking at her wrist. You have an email? And all of a sudden, we got another thing, all kinds of stuff. It's just amazing. You look at it. And yet, we can fight it. We can battle it. We can struggle with it. It's all part of that denial. I don't want this to be happening, but it's happening. I get angry because things are changing, because I don't really want to change. And then all of a sudden, I'm going to bargain and try to figure it out and try to work my way around it and look for a solution. And there's a sadness to that. There's a loss. It's the hardest thing in the world is to say goodbye. But yet we have to learn how to be able to say goodbye, and it takes time. And none of us do this easily, believe me. We don't let go of the past easily. We don't let go of a lot of things easily. We see a lot of situations that occur where people experience losses. Loss of a child, most powerful loss of all. Going through the concept of losing a sibling. My wife just went through that. The whole concept is we begin to experience the fact that, it's part of the journey. There's a beginning and there's an ending. Can we predict what it's going to be? No, we don't know. We don't know anything at all. I never forget, and it's sad. A good friend of mine, John, him and I were in a bowling league together. They lived over here in Holiday City with us. And he was my bowling partner on the team. And we bowled a couple good games, real good games. At the end of it, we sat down, could take your shoes off, put stuff in the bag and everything. And I said, okay, John, take care. John said, I'm going home to have some lunch. I says, okay, John, I'll see you later this afternoon. We both left at the same time. I got a phone call from his wife. 45 minutes later, he had died. He sat down to eat lunch and just fell over dead. How can you predict anything? It's part of the journey of life. I wish we could. But we can't play God. It's a journey. You have to realize the fact that it's hard sometimes to say goodbye. It's hard to go through these changes. It's hard to experience these things. Not only in death, but we are going through changes physically. We'll go through them emotionally. Our emotional system will change. We'll go through them spiritually. We'll go through them socially. Everything, unfortunately, has a process of changing. Even our kids, the empty nest syndrome. You know what happens to these kids? They have a problem. They grow up. And then they make decisions and all kinds of things. And you want to scream at them. You want to yell at them. Why are you doing this? Your life would be better if you did this. And yet they go on their journey. And sometimes the journey works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes they get into trouble. Things happen. It's part of the journey of life. So we all have to make mistakes. We all got to go through our changes to go through our growth. I look at this in my own life. I got 7 grandkids. And I had a ball with them. I really did. When they were small. But now the oldest one is 28. The youngest one is 18. And guess what? 3 of them are married. They got families. Hey, What happened? You weren't supposed to grow up. You weren't supposed to do this. But as they get older and as they begin to grow, guess what? I'm still growing too. So the process goes on. Life goes on. It's all part of it. It's how it works. And so it's interesting how sometimes in life, you wish things were the way they used to be. You wish you could go back, but you can't go back. I'm sorry. Yesterday is over. I can fight it. I can battle it. I can try to bring it back. Yes. Once in a while, have a good oldies night, where you go back to the 50s and the 60s. You even try to put outfits on that don't fit you anymore. It's fantastic. You try to do all kinds of crazy things. You have a lot of fun, but it's okay. We had a 50s night here, in Holiday City, and everybody got dressed up like they did way back in the 50s and all that. Oh my God, some of the outfits are unbelievable. Girls coming in, now these are women in their 60s and 70s coming in poodle skirts and all kinds of crazy things and everything else. We had a lot of fun. It really was. But we can't go back there. We can have memories and things of that effect, but you can't go back. I don't want to go back either, because there's a lot of other things that go along with going back, a lot of other struggles that go along with it. And so really, the grieving process is such a beautiful process and a very scary process that we go through in life. And we're constantly going through grieving. But here's the point I got to bring out so strongly. You can't grieve alone and by yourself, because you will bury it. We need help. We need outlets. We need support systems, people to help us through the grieving process. And that's the hardest thing for us to do very many times, is to ask for help, to be able to reach out, to be able to get somebody to help us to go through the grieving process, to be able to be with other people who've been there before. I'm so grateful for many of our 12-step programs because of that process we were taught, that we're not alone, we're connected. It's we all going through it. And experience is part of the process of learning, but we need outlets. I always tell the story, and here's the story Loretta wanted me to tell, so maybe I'll give her an ending today, and maybe I won't. We'll see what happens. But anyway, teenagers, aren't they wonderful? We can write books about one of those wonderful things called teenagers. Well, of course, as most of you know, when I got married, I inherited 3 teenage girls. It was quite an adventure, and even, I'm probably one of the rare stepfathers who heard a stepdaughter's confessions at one time. They really enjoyed having me join them. I won't go into that too much. But anyway, I remember one day, my youngest stepdaughter came running in the house. She was like a junior in high school. I ran past my wife and she said, "Can I go to dance tonight? I got to stay out into my curfew." She said it so fast, because my wife was on the phone. But mothers have this radar. It's an interesting radar. My wife turned around and said, "No, you may not stay out after your curfew. You can go to the dance, but be home by curfew." Well, she didn't want to hear that. So immediately she starts screaming. Every kid in the whole entire school is allowed to stay out after curfew. I'll be the only one that isn't. And I hate you. I can't stand you. I wish you were never my mother. I wish you were never born. I wish grandma never brought you into the world, and on and on and on and on. And then finally, running out of the room, running into a room and slamming the door. You're really teenagers. You're constantly fixing doors. That's totally amazing. Anyway, she gets on the phone, calls all of her girlfriends, and tells her girlfriend how terrible life is in his house, all this kind of stuff, everything else, blowing off her steam and everything else. That goes on for about a half an hour, maybe longer than that. Next thing you know is she hangs up, starts working on her homework. About 15 minutes later, she walks outside, walks in the kitchen and says, "Hi, Mom, what's for supper?" At this point, Mom is ready to say, "You are for supper." But in reality, she did something. Her behavior was not right. She did something that many of us have to learn how to do. And that concept is we need a support system. So what did she do? She got mad, she got angry, she tried to reason and bargain, then she couldn't get anywhere, so she went crazy. And she ran into her room and called her support system. She blew off her steam, she got it all out of her system. She was done. So basically, she had to accept the fact of what was, then went back out like nothing ever happened. Now, I know we've all experienced stuff like this. It's totally amazing. But the bottom line is, she's trying to teach us something. In the program, we have sponsors. We have people on our support system, people around us. We go through all kinds of feelings. We go through hurt. We go through grief. We go through this process. We need to be able to talk about it, not to keep it in. Because if you keep it in, it'll bury you. If you keep it in, you'll get depressed. You need to be able to process it, to let it out, to share it, to talk about it. And that goes in every area of life, because you're going to experience change constantly. It's part of the process of life. And it's hard for us. Even in jobs, a lot of times, today, because of technology, a lot of older people in jobs, I'm saying older, yeah, late 50s, but sometimes in the early 60s, are being kind of forced to retire, given nice severance packages. But again, what? They literally are put out in favor of younger people coming in, more technology. And then all of a sudden, they go through depression. They wake up in the morning. They have no place to go. They don't know what to do. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Do I just watch TV for the rest of my life? Do I just simply sit around? What do I do? That grows old after a while. It's almost like you've got to continue the process of life. You got to move forward. And yet, you're going to grieve the loss. You're going to feel it. You're going to get angry. You're going to go through bargaining, trying to figure it out. Why did this happen? And eventually you get sad about it. You lost something. You have to say goodbye to it. The hardest thing in the world is being able to say goodbye. It's called closure. There's a sadness to that. You're watching a part of your life come to an end, a part of a journey come to an end. But if we can truly feel the sadness and come to the acceptance and come to peace, then doors open and you're able to move on. It's amazing when you come down to it. Yet the hardest thing for us is to get caught up in a thing. I'm going to control the situation. I'm going to find an answer to it. I'll find somebody to blame. I'll go through all these types of things. It's all normal. And then basically it's not working. Well, it's not working, but because you're not working. We have to look at the concept of what's it really all about. And we're hard on ourselves. We're tough on ourselves when we go through the grieving process. It's almost like I have to come to an acceptance of this thing called my body. It's mine. I have to come to an acceptance of a lot of different things in life. When I come to acceptance, then basically I can move forward. So closure is hard. Moving on in technology is hard. I went through a lot of denial and fighting and battling. Making decisions are hard. I know with therapy, I had to go through a lot of stuff. And I still got to make a lot of decisions in the course of my journey in life. But I know that if I truly give myself permission to grieve, grief is what life really is all about. Patrick Carnes said it so beautifully. The 12 steps are a beautiful formula for grieving, to saying goodbye, to changing, a new era of life. It's really scary. One of the things I'll never forget, and I love telling the story, when I was in grammar school, we had the one individual, his name was Soupy, and Soupy was the guy that was always in trouble. Of course, you always have one. No matter what happened, he did it. He must have got beaten up by the nuns at least 40 times. My God, he took a beating. I think he enjoyed it personally. Did all kinds of crazy pranks on the nuns and everything else. And of course, they beat him half to death. So finally, we all decided, you know, he's probably going to end up in prison somewhere. He's crazy. Anyway, we had our 50th reunion, a grammar school reunion, and we invited everybody. And basically, we figured, well, Soupy's not going to be there unless they have two prison guards bring him. Well, Soupy arrived at the reunion and scared us all to death. He was a Protestant minister when he arrived. Unbelievable. We all almost fell down. He had changed completely. It's like what life is about. Sometimes, we live a certain lifestyle. We got to say goodbye to it. Have it open up to a new lifestyle. It's called transition. It's called change. And believe me, nothing in life is easy. Transition is not easy. Learning new things about yourself, opening up, getting in touch with who you are as a person. I mean, I never in my life wanted to deal with my eating disorder because I didn't have one. See how simple that was? Not a problem. Over 300 pounds, but I didn't have one. So literally, having to deal with that and face it and go through a program and work the steps and do all this kind of stuff. I had 2 years in a very structured program. And then from there to move forward to still work on it today. It's scary. It's called change. It means you have to stop denying the reality of what is and begin to look at your own self and make changes. Even in making changes, you make a lot of mistakes. Go through all types of things in life. Mistakes are part of it. We need mistakes to move forward. It's not easy. Now, I'll kind of close today. I want to talk about a story, one of my favorite ones I always talk about the journey of life. Now, it's a little funny in a way, but it's real. Visualize a baby inside the womb of a mother. And the mother's going through all kinds of stuff carrying that baby. The baby's in a nice warm womb. It likes it there. It's real comfortable, But then something happens. It begins to grow. And it's time for it to leave the womb. Now let's go inside the womb for a minute and listen to the baby. I don't want to leave. I like it here. But then on the other end, we got this guy. And the baby says, I don't like this guy. He's telling my mother to push. I don't want her to push. I want to stay. Now, the first battle of life takes place, the journey. It's not an easy journey. Mothers know what I'm talking about. It's painful and beautiful at the same time. Then once I get out there, I don't want to go out there, so I fight like crazy not to go out. I finally get out there, and this crazy guy who was saying push slaps me, shakes me, slaps me. Hey, I was nice and comfortable, and now I'm getting slapped. It's called the journey of life. Sometimes we got to go through struggle and go through pain to come to acceptance, to come to growth. Believe me, it's not supposed to be easy. And yet at the same time, it's wonderful and it's great. And we're going to go up, we're going to go down, we're going to go through changes. We belong to the club. Nobody does it perfectly, believe me. They may tell you they do, but they don't. They all go through their hurts, their pains, and their struggles. So the grieving process is the ultimate process of life. So what I want to do is I'm going to spend some time for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to concentrate next week on the first 3 stages, denial, anger, and bargaining. And I want to interconnect them with the 12 steps of the program as a process for grieving. And I really want to spend a lot of time on them because to me, they're the most pivotal steps of all of the grieving process. And many of us go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then last week, we'll talk a lot about sadness and acceptance, 2 of the most powerful parts of grieving. Then we'll finish the series off, Loretta told you, by her and I having a conversation on grieving and on the grieving process. So this whole entire month is dedicated to the concept of grieving. So my prayer tonight, I'm just asking that we give ourselves strength and courage to walk the journey of this earth, but to do it with guidance, do it with direction, and do it with others. Don't walk alone, please. It's a process we go through. Let us pray. God, we come before you in prayer. We ask the God of our understanding, our divine presence, to guide us, to be with us, to give us the strength, to give us the courage to walk this journey on earth. Give us the strength to go through the process of change, of learning, of growing. Give us the strength to be able to realize that sometimes we have to go through struggle, go through different things in life to become stronger, to learn, to move in new directions. It's just a gift of humility, to be open, to constantly be in this process of change and growth. Help us to deal with our losses. Help us to be open to new things in life. Help us to continue to grow, to learn, but above all, teach us never to be done, to realize the fact that life is a constant process of growth, a constant process of grieving and saying goodbye. Hopefully we learn from those we had to say goodbye to. We know that's all part of the journey. So we come here in gratitude, we come here in strength, we come here in humility. We ask for your guidance, we ask for your direction. And we ask that you give us the gift of openness, continue to learn and continue to grow. We pray, we ask for this guidance and for this direction, and give us the strength as we walk the journey with those around us. We thank you in gratitude, and we thank you in love. Amen.